Welcome to Xogot's modular series on 3D game development. This video will cover making improvements to the default player movement script. There are two main ways a jump can be improved, by adding animation or by making changes to the jump script itself. I'm going to focus on changing the script. These changes will really enhance the feel in a way that allows for customization. I've already attached the default script to my player. I've set up my virtual controllers, my input map, and I made a couple minor adjustments to the script. So I have the exported variables instead of the constants so that I can test out different options or even update it in the script later on. I've switched out the input actions for the actions I've created. So if we test out the movement here, I have just that default moving around, the default jump, but I can't do any rotating and the jump isn't that great. So I'm going to stop the preview here and I'm going to start by adding rotation to my script. Now, I've actually set up another version of the script with rotation already added in. And I'm just going to switch my player to use that version of the script. I'm just going to detach the original. I'm just grabbing the version of the script that I want and adding it back to the player. All right, there we go. So if I take a look at that script, you can see that I've added an export group. Now the export groups are great because they help keep your script organized. So for now I have a group for movement. I've renamed the speed variable to a variable called move speed, and everywhere I use that variable in the script, I've updated the name, and that frees me up to have a variable for the rotation speed. Both of those are floats because they're decimals, and I'm using 5 as a starting number. And we still have the exported variable for jump velocity. So in physics process, I've added a new variable for the input for my rotation. And so using the input to get the axis and setting the turn right and turn left actions to that axis. And then a little bit further down, after gravity, after the jump, I just have this single line here to actually rotate the player by taking the turn speed, multiplying it by that turn direction, and delta for consistency. So if we play with the new version of the script, I can use the right input that I set up previously for turning left and turning right, and I can rotate my player. Now the jump is still not great. So I'm going to switch out the script again for a version of the script that has a much more dynamic jump that's going to make the game more interesting. So just like before, I'm going to detach the script, and I'm just going to switch to the script that I've set up previously. That also includes my jump. So if we take a look, I have this updated version of the script. I still have the group for movement with the move speed and the turn speed. I've added an additional export group specifically for the jump physics, and you can see there are several exported variables here. I have one to represent the maximum height that the jump can reach, and that's specifically intended to be in meters. I have a variable for the airspeed, and so how fast the jump is going to have a big impact on how far the jump can actually go. And then the fall weight. And this is going to give the fall either a sort of floaty feel when the player is no longer jumping upward and they're falling back downwards, or it might give them a weightier, more solid feel during the fall, depending on what that number is set to. Then we have a couple of different ranges. The first one is for partial momentum. So if there's a partial jump, like the input gets interrupted before the jump reaches the maximum height, how much is the momentum going to change? Is it going to force a full jump no matter what, or can there be a partial jump? So that's what the partial momentum is going to do. And then the last export range is specifically looking at jump steering. So how much, once the player is in the air, can the jump be steered? That's anywhere from just a very small nudge with lower numbers to full steering with higher numbers. And so you can see that the export ranges, you can actually drag the slider to change those numbers, which is really helpful when you're testing out different options. So those are my variables. I've reorganized physics process. So I have all of the variables moved to the top so that they're available for the whole script. So that's the variable for the input direction, setting the actions for the various movement directions, a variable for the direction itself, and this is mapping the 3D movement to the player's actual direction. And then I have the turn direction. There is a new variable for horizontal velocity, so along the X and Z axes, and that's using vector 3 to find those settings. And I've adjusted gravity, so when the player's not on the floor, then they're in the air. So I have this new custom gravity variable, which is accessing the gravity for the project as a whole and just multiplying that by delta for consistency. Now, the velocity is changing by that custom gravity, also being impacted by the fall weight, if it exists. Otherwise, it's just using 1.0 so that it's not actually changing. So then it would just be the custom gravity. Now, for the jump itself, if the player is on the floor and the jump input is just pressed, then the y velocity is using the Torricelli equation, which is velocity equals the square root of 2 times gravity and the height. And this is a formula that lets us figure out the velocity needed to reach the maximum jump height. And so we're using that formula with our maximum height variable. Now, if the jump is released early and the player is still moving upward, then the velocity for y is being multiplied by that partial momentum variable. Nothing new about the rotation. Next, we have the ground movement. This has been moved to if it's on the floor. And so if there's directional input, then the horizontal velocity variable is going to be equal to the direction times the move speed. Otherwise, the player is no longer giving input, and so just smoothly decelerate to a stop. Now, if you wanted to customize the deceleration, you could change the number 5 here for something else, or you could replace it with a variable, or you could even remove the 5.0 times delta for an instant stop instead. Now, if the player is not on the floor, this is the air movement. If the player is jumping from a standstill, so you can see 0.1, so pretty much no movement there, then the horizontal velocity is going to be equal to the direction variable times the airspeed variable. And so this is just a starting direction. Otherwise, if there is direction, then the horizontal velocity variable is going to be a transition from the direction times the airspeed with whatever the jump steering is. So this is going to control how much steering is possible. And then we have the velocity for x and z set to whatever the horizontal velocity for x and z is. and executing the movement with move and slide. So if we play at this point, you can see that the jump is much more interesting already. And I'm going to just switch to the remote view here so that I can experiment with some of the different variables. I can change how high the player can jump. Maybe it's going to be really high. And if I do a partial jump, notice it's not always going that high. If I am moving forward at the same time I'm jumping, notice how that changes things. I can play around with the speed. Maybe that's pretty fast. Maybe I want to put that down to 5 or even 2. And so if I jump, particularly if I already have some movement, you can see how that's changing the impact. Now, if I want the feel of the fall to be a little bit different, I can start playing around. You can see that's much weightier. When I have a really low number, there's much more of a float going on. As far as the momentum goes, if I set this all the way up to 1, I'm always going to have a full jump no matter what I press. Or if I have this to a lower number, 0.5, it can go halfway. All right, I'm just going to set this to 0. When I do the jump, I can move one direction, but I can't move a second direction. So I can't go forwards and then back, or to the left and then to the right. I just have to choose a direction and stick with it. And so if I choose something in between, or perhaps something that's just on the low side, I can have my change in direction, and I can give it a little bit of a nudge after the fact, depending on what that number ends up being. All right, so you can see that these different variables have a huge impact on how the player movement and jump feels. So experiment with different values to create those different player experiences that you might want. And there's a lot more that can be adjusted. So have some fun experimenting, and we'll be back with more videos.